My father blocked every credit card he'd ever given my mother the same day their divorce was finalized. I found out at a grocery store checkout. She was buying milk and bread, and the card declined 3 times in a row. The cashier looked at her like she was trying to steal a gallon of 2%. My mother's hands were shaking when she pulled out her phone to call him. He didn't answer. I didn't know yet that this was just the beginning of something much worse. Something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about family. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, you'll understand this. My name's Claire, and this is what happened when the man I called Dad decided that erasing my mother also meant erasing me. The divorce itself wasn't a surprise. My parents had been cold to each other for years, moving through the house like strangers, who happened to share the same address and the same last name. My father was a corporate lawyer, the kind who worked 80-hour weeks, and measured his worth in billable hours and client wins. By the time I turned 22, their marriage was a performance. My mother had been a stay-at-home mom since I was born. She'd given up her career in graphic design to raise me and my younger brother. That was the deal they made back when they still made deals together. Polite at family dinners, silent everywhere else. When my father moved out, I remember feeling relieved. At least the pretending would stop, but I didn't expect what came next. The credit cards were just the first move. Within a week, my mother discovered that the joint bank account had been emptied. Not frozen, emptied. Every dollar she thought she had access to was gone. My father's lawyer sent a letter explaining that all shared assets were being secured, pending the division of marital property. My mother had $17 in her purse and no way to pay rent. I was still in grad school, living on student loans and a part-time job. That barely covered my own expenses. My brother was 19, halfway through his sophomore year of college, paid for entirely by our father. I called my dad that night. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice flat and professional. Like I was a client he didn't particularly want to talk to. She tried to get a job, but she hadn't worked in over 20 years. I asked him why he'd cut off Mom's cards without warning. He said it was a legal strategy, that his lawyer advised him to secure all financial assets immediately, to prevent her from draining accounts out of spite. I told him Mom had never been spiteful in her entire life. He said I didn't understand how divorces worked. Then he told me he had to go and he hung up. That was the first time I realized my father saw this as a war. And in war, you don't leave resources for the enemy, even if the enemy is the woman who raised your children. I started pulling double shifts at the campus library to help my mother pay for groceries. And her design software skills were completely outdated. No one wanted to hire a 50-year-old woman with a resume gap that long. She applied everywhere: retail, administrative assistant positions, even cleaning services. Nothing came through. Meanwhile, my father moved into a downtown penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. He posted a photo of it on Facebook. My brother liked the photo. I didn't realize how many people would see themselves in that moment, watching someone you love choose sides without even hesitating. My brother called me a week later and asked if I wanted to grab lunch. We met at a diner near campus, the kind with sticky vinyl booths, and waitresses who called everyone Hyun. He ordered a burger and fries, paid for with a card Dad had given him. I ordered coffee. He told me Dad was doing really well, that the new place was incredible, and that he'd been spending weekends there playing video games on a massive new TV. I asked him if he'd been to see Mom recently. He said he'd been busy with midterms. I asked him if he knew she was barely eating because she couldn't afford to buy herself food and pay the electricity bill at the same time. He looked uncomfortable. He said Dad told him Mom was being dramatic to get sympathy, that she'd spent recklessly and failed to contribute to the household, and that she'd be fine once the divorce settlement went through. I stared at him for a long time. I asked him if he actually believed that. He didn't answer. He just looked down at his fries and changed the subject. That was when I started to understand something terrible. My father wasn't just punishing my mother. He was rewriting the entire story of their marriage. God, he was making sure everyone in the family believed his version. 3 months into the divorce, my mother's lawyer told her that my father was claiming she'd been financially irresponsible during the marriage. He had receipts, bank statements, highlighted purchases. Everything she'd ever bought for herself or for us was being used as evidence that she didn't deserve an equal share of their assets. My mother cried when she told me this, not because she was angry, but because she felt humiliated. Every birthday gift she'd bought for us, every grocery trip, every piece of furniture she'd picked out for the home they shared. It was all being used to paint her as selfish and wasteful. She asked me if I thought she'd been a bad wife. I told her no, but I could see in her eyes that she was starting to believe it herself. That's what he wanted. He wanted her to feel small. And it was working. I started digging. I went through old family documents, things my mother had kept in boxes in the basement. Tax returns, mortgage statements, old emails. I wasn't looking for anything specific at first. I just wanted to understand how we'd gotten here. But then I found something. An email my father had sent to my mother 6 years earlier, during a fight they'd had about money. In the email, he told her that she should be grateful he was willing to support her, because without him, she'd be nothing. He said she had no skills, no ambition, and no value outside of being his wife. He said if she ever left him, she'd end up alone and broke. And no one would care. I've read that email 5 times. Each time I felt something harden inside me. This wasn't just a divorce. This was him making good on a threat he'd made years ago. I printed the email. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I couldn't let him get away with pretending. He was the victim in all of this. My father started dating someone new 4 months after he moved out. Her name was Jessica, and she was 31, 9 years older than me. My brother mentioned her casually one day, like it was no big deal. He said she was cool, that she worked in marketing, and that Dad seemed really happy. I asked him how long Dad had been seeing her. He shrugged and said he didn't know. A few weeks, maybe. I didn't say anything, but I felt sick. My mother was still sleeping on a borrowed air mattress in the living room because she couldn't afford a new bed frame, and my father was taking a woman half his age out to expensive dinners. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just kept working, kept helping my mom, kept pretending everything was fine, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was a witness, and I was starting to realize that there are things you can't unsee, truths about people that change everything. The question I kept asking myself was simple. What do you do when the person who's supposed to protect you is the one inflicting the most damage? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I was running out of time to figure it out. Jessica was polite, friendly even, but there was something performative about the whole thing. My father invited my brother and me to dinner at his new place. He said he wanted us to meet Jessica properly. My brother said yes immediately. I said I'd think about it. My mother told me I should go. She said it wasn't fair for me to lose my relationship with my father just because of her. I told her it wasn't about her. It was about him, but she looked at me with so much sadness that I agreed to go anyway. I didn't want her to feel guilty for something that wasn't her fault. The dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as I expected. She asked me about grad school, complimented my earrings, and talked about how much she loved the city. My father smiled the entire time, his hand resting on her lower back, like he was showing off a prize he'd won. At one point, he mentioned that Jessica had just gotten a promotion at her firm. He said it with pride, like he'd had something to do with it. Then he looked at me and asked how my mother was doing. The question felt like a trap. I told him she was managing. He nodded, Like that was the answer he expected, and then he changed the subject. That was the moment I realized he didn't actually care. He just wanted to make sure I knew he'd moved on. After dinner, my brother stayed to watch a movie with them. I said I had to study and left. On the drive home, I cried for the first time in months. Not because I was sad, but because I was angry. Angry that he could sit there in his perfect apartment with his perfect new girlfriend and act like the past 25 years hadn't happened. Angry that my brother was so willing to go along with it. And angry that my mother still thought she had to protect him from me. The divorce proceedings dragged on for almost a year. My father's lawyer kept filing delays, requesting more documentation, challenging every single expense my mother claimed. It was designed to exhaust her financially and emotionally. And it was working. My mother's lawyer told her she could fight harder, but it would cost more money than she had. So she started accepting less. Less of the house equity, less of the retirement savings, less of everything. She said she just wanted it to be over. I told her she deserved more. She said she didn't have the strength to keep fighting. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to let him win by default. I called my father and asked if I could meet him for coffee. Just the two of us. He sounded surprised, but he agreed. We met at a cafe downtown, the kind with exposed brick walls and overpriced espresso drinks. He ordered a cappuccino and asked me how school was going. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I pulled out the printed email and slid it across the table. He looked down at it, and I watched his expression change. Not shock, not guilt, just calculation. He asked me where I got it. I told him it didn't matter. I told him I knew what he'd been doing. Then I knew this whole divorce wasn't about protecting himself or securing assets. It was about punishing her for having the audacity to leave. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me, calm and cold, and said, "Your mother made her choices. Now, she has to live with them." I asked him what choices she'd made other than loving him for 25 years and raising his children. He didn't answer. He just picked up the email, folded it neatly, and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he stood up. He told me I was being emotional and that I'd understand when I was older. He said he hoped I'd come around eventually, but that he wasn't going to apologize for protecting his financial future. Then he walked out. I sat there for a long time after he left. I kept replaying his words in my head, trying to find some crack in them, some hint that he felt anything at all. But there was nothing. He meant every word. That was the last time I spoke to my father in person. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. My mother ended up with less than 30% of their shared assets. The house had to be sold, and after the mortgage was paid off, she walked away with barely enough for a down payment on a small apartment. My father kept his retirement accounts, his car, his boat, and the vacation property in Vermont. My brother didn't seem to notice how uneven it was. Or maybe he just didn't want to. He invited me to Dad's engagement party 6 months later. Jessica had said yes. I didn't go. My brother called me afterward and said I was being unfair, that Dad had moved on and I should too. I asked him if he'd been to see Mom recently. He said he'd been busy. I told him he was a coward. He hung up on me. We didn't speak for almost a year after that. My mother moved into her new apartment with help from a few friends. It was small, 1 bedroom, in a neighborhood that wasn't great but wasn't terrible. She got a part-time job at a bookstore and started taking online courses to update her design skills. She told me she was okay, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes every time I visited. She'd aged 10 years in the span of 2, and I hated him for it. Not the loud, explosive kind of hate. The quiet, permanent kind. The kind that sits in your chest and never really goes away. I graduated from grad school a year later. My mother came to the ceremony. My father did not. He sent a card with a check for $500 and a note that said, proud of you. Let's catch up soon. I tore up the check. My brother reached out a few months later. He said he wanted to talk, that he'd been thinking about everything that had happened. We met for coffee, the same diner we'd gone to years before. He looked older, tired in a way I hadn't seen before. He told me he'd been spending less time with Dad, that he'd started to notice things, the way Dad talked about Mom, the way he dismissed her completely, like she never existed. He said it made him uncomfortable. I didn't say anything, I just waited. He told me he'd gone to visit Mom a few weeks earlier, that she'd cried when she saw him and it broke his heart. He said he didn't know how to fix it. I told him he couldn't fix it, but he could stop pretending it wasn't broken. He nodded. He didn't apologize, but I didn't need him to. Some people take longer to see the truth, and some people never see it at all. A few years passed. My father married Jessica in a small ceremony in Vermont. My brother went, but he didn't tell me about it until afterward. He said it felt wrong the whole time. My mother eventually found full-time work at a nonprofit. She said it didn't pay much, but it made her feel useful again. She started smiling more. Not the same way she used to, but in a quieter, steadier way. Like she'd survived something she never thought she would. My father and I haven't spoken in over 4 years. He sends me a birthday text every year. I never respond. My brother asked me once if I'd ever forgive him. I told him forgiveness wasn't the same as reconciliation, that I could forgive someone and still never want to see them again. He didn't understand, but I didn't expect him to. There are things you learn about people during a divorce. Things that don't come out during the good years. You learn who someone really is when there's nothing left to lose. My father chose cruelty. He chose control. And he chose his pride over his family. I don't know if he ever thinks about what he did. I don't know if he regrets it. And honestly, I don't care anymore. Because the truth is, some people don't deserve your energy. Not your anger, not your sadness, not your hope that they'll change. They've already shown you who they are. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is believe them. I see my mother every week now. We have dinner together, talk about work, watch old movies. She's building a life that's hers, not defined by him. It's smaller than the one she had before, but it's real, and she's proud of it. My brother and I are still working on a relationship. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. He tells me sometimes that he wishes he'd handled things differently, that he wishes he'd seen what was happening sooner. I tell him we all did the best we could with what we knew at the time. I don't know if that's true, but I know it's what he needs to hear. As for my father, I heard through my brother that his marriage to Jessica ended last year. Apparently, she left him for someone closer to her own age. My brother said Dad was devastated, that he couldn't understand why she would do that to him. I didn't laugh when I heard that, but I didn't feel sorry for him either. Some lessons take a lifetime to learn, and some people never learn them at all. I think about that email sometimes. The one he wrote to my mother all those years ago. The one that said she'd be nothing without him. He was wrong. She's more than she ever was when she was trying to make him happy. And he's alone. Not because of the divorce, but because he never learned that love isn't something you control. It's something you give freely without conditions. And when you treat it like a transaction, you lose it. Every single time. I don't hate my father anymore. I don't think about him much at all, if I'm being honest. But I do think about the people who stay, the ones who show up when things fall apart, the ones who don't make love conditional on power or money or convenience. Those are the people who matter, and the rest, well, they fade into the background eventually. Like a conversation you had years ago that you can barely remember. My mother told me recently that she's dating someone, a man she met at the nonprofit where she works. She said he's kind, patient, and that he listens when she talks. She sounded happy when she told me about him. really happy. I asked her if she was scared. She said yes. But she said fear doesn't mean you stop trying. It just means you're still alive. I've been thinking a lot about that lately. I thought about what it means to be alive after something breaks you, about how you rebuild when the blueprint is gone. I don't have all the answers, but I know this. You don't have to forgive someone to move forward. You don't have to pretend the damage wasn't real, and you don't owe anyone your presence just because they share your blood. Some relationships aren't worth saving, and that's okay. It took me a long time to understand that, to stop feeling guilty for choosing myself over someone who never chose me. But I get it now, and I'm not going back. So, here's what I want to leave you with. If you're in a situation where someone is using money, power, or guilt to control you, know that you don't have to stay. You don't have to keep fighting a war they're determined to win. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. Not because you're giving up, but because you're choosing peace over proximity. And that's not weakness, that's survival. I didn't plan for my father's actions to define this chapter of my life, but they did. And I spent years trying to understand why he did what he did. Why he chose cruelty over kindness, control over connection. I still don't have a good answer. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe some people are just wired differently. Maybe they see relationships as transactions and love as leverage. And maybe that's not something you can fix. But what I do know is this: you get to decide what kind of person you want to be. When someone else chooses to be cruel, you get to decide whether you let their actions define you or refine you. I chose the latter, and I'm still choosing it every day. My father blocked all his credit cards after the divorce. He emptied the bank accounts, fought for every dollar, and walked away from 25 years of marriage like it meant nothing. And in doing so, he lost more than he could have ever imagined. Not just his wife, but his daughter, and eventually the respect of his son. He thought he was protecting himself, but all he did was prove that money can't buy loyalty, and power can't replace love. So if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for sitting with the story, even when it was uncomfortable. I didn't tell it for revenge. I told it because I needed to understand it myself. And because I think there are people out there who need to hear it. People who are standing in the wreckage of a relationship and wondering if they're the ones who are broken. You're not. You're just stuck with someone who is. And you don't have to stay there. Have you ever had to walk away from people who should love you,